Good day, friends. Welcome back to my channel. Today's sourdough recipe is a jalapeno cheddar with a twist. Stay tuned so you know what that twist is. We're going to start off with 400 grams of water, and I have to be careful to keep my hand off the bowl, otherwise it will adjust the scale. And then I'm going to add 110 grams of sourdough starter at its peak. And today I'm using a slightly stiff sourdough starter. Once that's in there, I will then start to mix it until it becomes a milky consistency. Now I'm going to start adding my flour, 550 grams in total, and I'm going to use a flour blend. I find using more than one flour really enhances the flavor of the sourdough, and this is where the twist comes in. So I'm going to start adding 250 grams of Trailblazer flour. And then after that, I'm going to add 250 grams of Bob's Red Mill Artisan bread flour. And then I'll be adding 50 grams of Semolina flour, and yes, Semolina, which is often used for making pasta because it's durum wheat, but you can also put it in bread. And then I'm using some malted flour, and I'm only using a half teaspoon. In most of my recipes, I use a whole teaspoon, but the Bob's Red Mill flour contains some already, so I don't want to overuse it. If you add too much, you're going to have a gummy texture to your dough. And I'm also adding 12 grams of salt. Now I'm going to start mixing the dough with my wooden spatula. And I'm going to mix it just until it comes together. And I'm going to try to keep all the flour in the bowl, which is sometimes a challenge. So it's coming together nicely. And as soon as I get it just to come together, I'm going to switch to the bowl scraper, which will be in just a moment. So I'm going to clean off the wooden spatula and then start using the the bowl scraper to clean the sides of the bowl and to bring the dough further together. Once I get it mostly together, I'm going to then use my hand. My hand is really the best way for me to determine whether or not I have enough water in the dough. So I'm going to wet my hand to keep it from sticking to the dough, and then just mix it until it becomes just a shaggy dough. And this is what it looks like. Now it's going into a warm oven for 1 hour, and I turn on my oven light to make it warm. This is what the dough looks like after it's been in the oven for an hour, and I'm going to do the first round of stretch and folds. And this is where you're starting to build the gluten structure. I'm also going to turn the dough on itself a few times, and then I will place it back in the oven for another 30 minutes. This is round 2 of stretch and folds, and this is what the dough looks like. It's looking smoother. I'm going to wet my hand and do a full set of stretch and folds. And then I will turn it on itself a few times before putting it back in the oven for another 30 minutes. This is round 3 of stretch and folds, and you can see fermentation has begun. There are fermentation bubbles on the surface of the dough. The dough is smooth. It's also started to become airy, and I'm going to do a full round of stretch and folds, and then I'm going to do the window pane test. And you can see it fails. It tears right away. So back in the oven it goes for another 30 minutes, and I'll do a 4th round of stretch and folds. This is round 4, and you can see the dough has started to expand. I decided to do a coil fold instead of a stretch and fold, so you'll see me doing that here. And this also builds the gluten structure. And I will also do another window pane test. Let's see if it passes. And it does, so I'm calling it good, and it's going to go into a warm oven for about 3 hours. Now this recipe calls for lamination. We're going to laminate the jalapenos and cheddar into the dough, and it's really a fun process. The first thing you have to do is wet your counter, and then you're going to turn the dough out onto your counter and stretch it. And it is fun to stretch the dough. You want to be careful not to tear the dough. You want to have wet hands and then just stretch the dough out. And I stretch it out pretty large. But again, you don't want to tear it, and I'll show you how easily it stretches by lifting up the dough on each bottom corner. It stretches really nicely. Now I'm going to start adding the inclusions, and I've already pre-chopped the jalapeno, and I generally use just a large jalapeno. You could use more depending on what you like, and then I use a sharp cheddar cheese, and I'm just going to spread those out on the dough. One more thing to note, I cube my cheese. I do not grate it. I know some people will grate their cheese and actually add the inclusions when they're doing their stretch and folds, but I really prefer the lamination process. It's also a great skill to learn. Once I get enough of the inclusions on the dough, I'm going to fold it, and then I'm going to add some additional inclusions. And this just ensures that there's even distribution in your sourdough. I just about have all of the inclusions added. Once that's done, I'm going to fold the dough on itself and then put it back in the bowl for 20 minutes to rest. Now that the dough is done resting, I'm going to prepare the counter. I'm going to add some rice flour to the counter, and we'll be turning the dough out. And the dough turns out very easily. And look how beautiful that dough looks. I'm going to do a letter fold, and then I'm just going to pull the two sides up to meet one another, and then turn it over and use the bench scraper to bring it back into a bowl. And this is building tension on the surface of the dough. And I'm going to let it rest for 20 minutes. 20 minutes have passed, and now I'm going to do the final shaping of the dough. I'm going to add some rice flour to the surface and then flip it over. I'm going to do a letter fold again, and then I'm going to roll it. Since I have some of the inclusions falling out, I'm going to use my bench scraper just to bring everything together and continue to build that tension. Now it's time to put it into the banneton. I have lined the banneton with a cloth, and I've added rice flour. I flipped it in. I'm now going to let it rest for 20 minutes. Now that the dough has rested, I'm going to work on further closing up that seam, and also I'm going to build tension by pulling it together. Once I have that seam closed, I will be adding rice flour to the surface of the dough to ensure that it doesn't stick to the liner. Then I'll place it in the refrigerator for 2 hours for cold fermentation. And this is a same-day sourdough. You could certainly leave it in the refrigerator for 12 hours or longer, and that would really enhance the flavor. But for the purpose of this video, I'm doing a same-day sourdough. So into the refrigerator it goes. It is now time to bake the sourdough. You'll see that I have a decorative piece of parchment paper. I ran out of my standard parchment paper. The dough is looking great. I'm going to turn it out onto the parchment paper, and you'll see I don't do a very good job of centering it. And I try to move it, and then I decide that's not a good idea. So I'm going to sprinkle it with some rice flour and then do my standard score, which includes 4 wheat stalks and then 2 slashes across the top. I will then be placing it in a preheated oven, 450 degrees, in a Dutch oven, and I'm going to leave the lid on for the first 30 minutes, and then the last 10 minutes I will take it off. Now that the scoring is done, into the oven it goes. This is what the sourdough looks like coming out of the oven. It looks beautiful. It also has a beautiful yellow hue from the semolina flour, and the semolina flour really complements the jalapeno cheddar in the sourdough. Happy sourdough baking!